Hello, everyone. Welcome to Global Hack Week. I'm super excited to see y'all in the chat. Looks like there's a few questions already. Before I dive into those, I just want to welcome you to Global Hack Week and this GitHub Copilot mini event. If you haven't already, make sure you register your attendance with our event link. I'm going to paste that in the chat, but make sure you fill that out so you can register your attendance at this mini event. Looks like we have a few questions. I'll answer those before we dive in and give y'all a little bit of time to record your attendance. Will there be a recording of this stream? Yes, we have a recording of all of our streams. If they're not uploaded by the end of the day, they'll be uploaded shortly after, both on our Twitch and our YouTube channels. So you can just check it after the fact to see any streams you might have missed because you were sleeping at work or at class or something like that. Awesome. It looks like we have a lot of people in the chat. Super excited to see y'all. So let's get started. We'll be diving into GitHub Copilot today, which is an awesome AI assistant that can kind of help you make better hacks a little bit faster. So before we get started, my name is Gabriella. I'm a coach here at Major League Hacking. I use she, her pronouns. And a fun fact about me is that the first time I got a passport, the Department of State misspelled my last name, so I had to send it back so they could fix that so I could actually get on an airplane. It's a little bit of a hassle, but it's all figured out now. So now kind of diving into GitHub Copilot and why you might want to use it. So GitHub Copilot is essentially an AI assistant that's built on the GPT-4 model, and you're able to integrate it into your IDEs as long as you have like GitHub kind of integrated into your IDE, and you also have like the GitHub Copilot extension installed. I'll get into the logistics of all that later. But essentially like why you might want to use it is just because like it's very helpful if you need help explaining things, or you like are looking for like a quick fix to maybe an installation error or a bug you're seeing in your code. It can be super helpful. I personally really like it more than maybe other GPT models that you might use when you're coding, because it's already in your IDE, so it's very easy to kind of use simultaneously. Like while you're coding, you don't need to be switching back and forth between like a ChatGPT window and VS Code or whatever IDE you're using. I really like that it's all integrated into one place. And this is kind of like what talking with Copilot would look like. Yeah, I kind of went over what GitHub Copilot is, why you would use it. In this mini event, we'll be setting up GitHub Copilot. We'll be using specifically VS Code in this workshop, as well as the GitHub Copilot extension, and we'll walk through the installation of that. And then after we go through all of that, we'll be going through a quick Python tutorial. So we'll have a broken Python project, and I'll walk through how you would use GitHub Copilot to fix that project. All right, so if you're curious how you might actually use GitHub Copilot or a GPT assistant in your IDE, this is how you're going to enter in all your coding questions that you might have entered into ChatGPT or another like language model. So if you're curious about like how to do some sort of specific like attribute in Python or JavaScript, or you have a bug, you can kind of do all of that. So here are some of like the things you would say to GitHub Copilot. These screens at the bottom are like what it looks like inside of an IDE. So if you're trying to make a new button component on your website, if you're utilizing React, you could type that in and it'll generate some sample code for you and kind of walk you through an explanation of that. You can ask it more questions if you're not totally like understanding the code it generated. They also have really cool commands in GitHub Copilot. So here we're highlighting fix and explain. So the /fix will show you a potential solution to the problem or the bug you're facing in your code. So here we see fix, my var is undefined, and it'll show you kind of a solution to the undefined error you're getting. And the explain / is a really awesome command as well, because it shows you an explanation of either the entire code file or a specific line, which I think is a really helpful feature, because you don't need to be going back and forth between two windows. Like in your IDE, it will explain like a specific line of code or the entire code file if you're maybe utilizing like a template, or maybe you're accessing some code that was already a part of your job, or like a school project, like where they give you starter code, you're not totally sure like what's going on with it. I think the explain feature is a really helpful feature. All right, so kind of now that I've explained what GitHub Copilot does and some reasons you might use it, let's go into like what we've seen when testing out GitHub Copilot, giving it to developers and seeing what they think. We've seen that developers have found that they're 55% faster when coding, which I think is a great thing. Who doesn't want to be finishing their projects a little bit faster and not being as frustrated? Something I want to highlight is that a lot of developers, it looks like the majority, were less frustrated when coding and more fulfilled with their projects, like when using GitHub Copilot, because they weren't as frustrated with everything. Yeah, so looks like just a few hours can be turned into less if you're using GitHub Copilot, kind of like in a developer ecosystem. Awesome. So now we're going to get into setting up GitHub Copilot and how you're going to integrate it into VS Code. Before we do that, GitHub Copilot lives where you write your code. There's a lot of, I guess, back and forth about which text editor is best. I'm most familiar with VS Code, so that's what we'll be using. Here is a little comic that we have about like how people argue about which IDE is best and what real programmers use. But you don't need to, I guess, get into the specifics or argue about which IDE is best. We'll just be using VS Code for this sample workshop. But if you'd like to use it in your own IDE, you're able to do that as well. All right. So here are some different IDEs that GitHub Copilot can live in. You can also use it in the command line through like the GitHub command line interface. But like I said, we'll be using VS Code for the specific mini event. So if you don't already, you can install VS Code by going to this particular URL. It's code.visualstudio.com, and you're able to install it. I'll give you all a few minutes to run through the installation while I go back and see if there's any questions I missed while I was talking through kind of like what GitHub Copilot is. All right. Is it different than other Copilots? I think it's unique because it's kind of geared directly to your specific code, as well as it's integrated with GitHub, which I feel like is really useful. So you're able to use it in GitHub code spaces, which I'll be showing you today. It's a little bit easier to share screen in the browser versus the desktop for our setup. So I'll show you how it is utilized in code spaces, which I feel like is a pretty unique attribute. And I also like how you're able to kind of look at the like merge differences. So like if you're looking at merge differences or something on a different branch from GitHub and your IDE, GitHub Copilot is able to explain that a lot easier, which I think is a unique aspect compared to some other Copilots you might be familiar with. All right. Someone asked, do you think an i3 7th generation can handle it? I'm assuming that's your computer, in which case I would say I think so. I haven't had any hackers have issues in the past with GitHub Copilot, like not working with like an older computer. But if you run into any issues, feel free to send those in the chat and I can help you work through those errors as we get them. All right. So I'm going to assume that y'all have installed GitHub, or not GitHub, my bad, Visual Studio Code, and we can kind of move on to the rest of this workshop. But if you haven't already, I can answer questions to help y'all get caught up after the fact. All right, so once you have GitHub, or once you have Visual Studio Code installed and it's on your desktop, you're going to go to the top and you're going to type in install extension. This is where you can install a lot of extensions in Visual Studio Code. GitHub Copilot is one of many. You might also need to install Git into your computer if you don't already have that installed. That will allow you to like log into your GitHub account and access Copilot. Also, I do want to preface that Copilot is not freely available to everyone online. You can get access through MLH or through the Student Developer Pack, which I'll talk about in just a second after we go through the installation process. All right, so once you type in install extension, you're going to search for GitHub Copilot in this like left-hand side. As you can see, there's some other extensions. There's some for HTML, some for Python, or what we're focused on is GitHub Copilot right now. All right, and once you have typed in GitHub Copilot, you should see something like this pop up. You'll click install. There's a few other Copilot themes, Copilot extensions. You just wanted to have the one that's verified by github.com, has this little pilot logo with from GitHub. And there should be like a decent amount of installs. It's a very popular extension. All right. So once you've gone through the installation process and GitHub Copilot is installed, you'll need to activate it. So if you don't activate it through MLH/the Student Developer Pack, GitHub Copilot costs around $10 a month. But lucky for us, we have the GitHub Student Developers Pack where you can access it for free. So in order to get the GitHub Student Developers Pack, you'll need to go to this specific link. If you don't have it already, if you already have the GitHub Student Developer Pack, getting access to Copilot is really easy. As long as it's like attached to your account, you should be able to download the Copilot extension and have access to it very quickly. But if you don't already have the Student Developer Pack, you'll need to go to this Hack Pack link. I'll send it in the chat. So it's easier for y'all to click on. I also want to say that getting access to the Student Developer Pack sometimes takes a little while. To get approved, you'll need to submit either a picture of your student ID, and if your student ID doesn't have your like graduation date on it, you'll need to submit something like a transcript or like a class schedule that has your name, has like your university's like letter stamp, as well as like the semester or the date. Someone says, I can't download GitHub Copilot with my current version. I'm going to assume that that is related to your VS Code version. So I would go into your Visual Studio Code and look for kind of like an update or installation for updates in your main browser. It might be under settings. I'm going to look at mine. Yes, so if you have a Mac, under the code menu at the top, you should have something that says restart to update, and that'll restart your VS Code window and should install the updates. It'll be a similar process for PC, just might not be under the exact same menu. So I think if you click on Visual Studio Code, or maybe go to settings and PC, you should be able to find the update or restart like button, in which case you'll click that before you install the GitHub Copilot extension. The name of the extension we need to install is called GitHub Copilot. And then for anyone who needs to get the Student Developer Pack, you'll go to this link and you'll input your information. It will take a little while to get approved, but of course this is recorded. And I can link to some documentation that goes a little bit more in depth to Copilot you can access after this mini event. Okay, and it looks like we have an answer for updating VS Code on PC and probably Linux. So if you don't have a Mac, this is likely a good flow to follow. All right, I'm going to give y'all a minute to claim the GitHub Student Developer Pack, update your VS Code, whatever you might need to kind of get caught up, and then we'll move on to actually utilizing GitHub Copilot in your IDE. Do we have to be students to participate in this program? Typically, you do. I believe that through MLH, you might be able to get access to the developer pack. I will double check on that and get back to y'all through the Discord. But I believe you're able to get access to the student developer pack. Yeah, if not, I can just walk you through this and show you the capabilities of it. Yeah. All right. So now that I've given everyone a minute to claim the student developer pack if they don't already have it, or make any install updates, we're going to get started on actually utilizing the GitHub Copilot extension. So in order to do this, you need to actually have a project in your VS Code. So you'll need to open a new window and click and select Clone Git Repo. And this is where you're going to go to access the sample Python project we'll be working on. All right, so once you click on Open a New Window and you click Clone Git Repository, you're going to clone a Git repository that says it's called mlh/copilot-starter. And this is a basic Flask app that we're going to be using to kind of show you how to use GitHub Copilot. All right. Once you do that, you should be able to see the project. So this is the part where I'm going to move over to GitHub Code Spaces in the browser to kind of walk you through how you use GitHub Copilot. I'm going to switch my screens over to GitHub Code Spaces. And it looks like we have a few questions. It's not letting me claim my student developer pack. Is it giving you any specific error message? And yes, I will send the clone text in the chat. It's an MLH repository, and it's called Copilot-starter. I'll send that in the chat, and I can put it up on the screen as well for a minute if y'all weren't able to get that. All right. If it asks you suggestions matching public code, that's up to you. Sometimes it's useful when you're going through and creating an application, but if you're going to be submitting things for classes, I might turn this off if you think that it would lead you to accidentally plagiarize something. And also always double check the code you're doing and don't just only use Copilot to write all your code. It's meant to be kind of an assistant rather than doing all the heavy lifting. So up to you, but yes. First, it says no matching commands. So if you're trying to do this in your CLI, you should be doing it up at the top after you said clone. It says the repo does not exist. That is interesting. Let me confirm I sent the right link. Yes, so the repo does exist. If you're having issues with the repo not loading, make sure you're logged into your GitHub account in your Visual Studio Code. So you're going to do that. If you click on the third from the top icon on the left, if you see this right here, I don't know if you can see my mouse. Yeah, so if you see this with like it's the version control icon, you should be able to log into your GitHub account there, and that will allow you to access both Copilot if you have the student developer pack activated, as well as the MLH Copilot starter. Awesome. I think everyone should be, for those of you who are asking, yes, you're typing it up at the top in like the search bar after you click on clone Git repo. If you can see on the Visual Studio Code screen, there is a button that says clone Git repo, which will bring you to this, and you'll need to type in MLH/Copilot starter. You are able to do it in the CLI as like a backup, but this is a little bit easier to do it through the user interface. If the pack isn't activated, you can follow along. And I'm almost positive you can clone the MLH repository. You just won't be able to use Copilot like inline throughout this workshop. Once it's activated, you can go back and use it on your own, but I'll be kind of talking through everything on screen. And I'll be moving over to a code space in a second to show y'all what it looks like in the code. All right. So we're going to be opening up app.py. So I'm going to switch over my screen right here. So I'm going to add it to the stage. All right. So as you can see here, it has like a simple browser of what's going on with our code. It's broken. That's kind of the whole point of this workshop, is to show you all that, like how you can use GitHub Copilot to help fix your broken code. So I'm going to open up app.py. Here we have just like a basic Flask app. We're importing Flask. We're importing time. We're creating the app essentially, and then we have two functions. One of them is called seconds since epoch, and it's defining the epoch using the time library we imported, as well as returning that. And then we have a basic seconds function under an app route that's like the home. In Flask, any app that's routed with just / will be like the first page you see. So that's like basically what it's doing, but I'll also have Copilot explain things in just a second. Yeah. So just so we can have Copilot explain, I'm going to Control A to kind of select everything and then hit, looks like I don't have Copilot installed in the browser. I'm going to do that very quickly. Copilot, I'm going to hit install. So when you do something in code spaces and you don't have everything set up to sync, sometimes you'll need to reinstall libraries, which it looks like is what is happening here. So I'm going to go back to app.py and see Control A. Here we see Copilot's actually showing up now. It'll have like a little like pop-up that it'll usually have if you're in the desktop version of VS Code, which most of you like typically will be when I'm coding normally. I'm the desktop version. You can also have it as like a side-by-side column where you see like in the Explorer column, all of like the files. You can also kind of like have like a chat Copilot going as well for like more in-depth and like longer conversations. So I'm going to do the explain command just because I want to see everything that's going on. As you can see, the column of the chat has popped up, and it's going to explain kind of everything in more detail. I gave you all a brief explanation, but here you can see everything it's doing. All right, so it's utilizing references. While it's thinking, I'm going to show you the references it's using. So here are all the different Python files it's using. It's good that it's accessing all the files in this Flask project because it has more context and it can allow us to give more information. If you're just doing it on like a simple like Python script, like one Python script or one HTML file, it might not have the context it needs to give you like the best explanation because it doesn't have the context of the whole project. It just has the file context. All right. It's a simple Flask web application that returns the number of seconds since the Unix epoch. which was on January 1st, 1970. Importing Flask, importing time from the built-in time module. That's telling us what Flask is, which if you're interested, you can go back and read all this. All right, and then next, it's creating an instance of the Flask class, and it's assigning it to the variable name app. So right here, this is line 4, and it tells us the name argument is a special variable in Python, which gets the value as the name of a module it's used, and then Flask will use the location of the module as kind of like a starting point for the website. The second since epoch function uses a time module's time function to get the current time in seconds since the epoch. The time function returns a floating point number representing the time in seconds, and is converted to an integer using the int function, which we can see right here. All the stuff I was explaining about getting the time and converting it to seconds, all done right here. And then here we have an explanation of the app router. So this is like how Flask specifies that this function, like immediately following, so the seconds function right here, should be called at the root. So sometimes we'll have roots in like more complex Flask applications where you have something like an about page, maybe a purchase page if it's like an e-commerce website. But this is just like the index.html file you'll see like when you deploy a normal website. And when you navigate to this root URL, you should see the number of seconds since the Unix epoch is displayed in your browser. Awesome. So I'm going to open up the simple browser. So this is just like the deployment of the like web app in like GitHub code spaces. If you're doing this on the browser, it'll give you a specific site to run this on, just for like ease of like sharing my screen. I'm going to do it in GitHub code spaces. But if you're doing this on the desktop, just navigate to the localhost URL it gives you right here. So here we can see that there is a type error. The view function did not return a valid response. Return type must be a string, dict, a list, tuple with headers or status, response instance, or WSGI callable, but it was an integer. So what I think this means is that we need to change our return type. So here we have it returning an integer, the epoch converted into an integer, and that's causing us some issues. So now that we've like kind of gone into like how it's being broken, I think the next thing we need to do in order to debug it is ask it to essentially fix it with GitHub Copilot. So I'm going to open up GitHub and do the fix command and see what it comes up with. To fix the code, I would add the missing import statement for the time module inside the selected code block. So this is because I just selected the one line, doesn't have the full context. I'm going to discard that because I don't want it to actually do that because that's not the issue. And I'm just going to type fix for the entire document after I Control A. Okay. It's also setting the time module. So I'm going to say fix, and then I'm going to say fix, return type can't be an int. All right, so here it has a modifier. It's going to do return a string instead of an int, which if we look here, that would work. So I'm going to accept the change, and we are going to rerun this really quick. So I'm going to type in Flask run, and then we're going to open up the browser really quickly. Flask run. All right. So it is opening up in the other browser because I accidentally closed that preview. But let me see if I can close this and get another like in file preview. Okay. So I'm going to type flask run. Here we go. Here's a simple browser on the right. So as we can see here, the seconds function is returning properly now that we used GitHub Copilot to kind of fix this error. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the chat, see if there's any questions. Okay, it looks like someone answered the question on the extra icons. Under the extensions icon, that's just other extensions I've downloaded for like my day-to-day use, and they're here because of my code space just kind of being pre-configured. How important is it to clone the repo for Copilot? This is just an example project. If you already have GitHub Copilot installed, you should just be good to go, and this can kind of show you some extra functions you might be able to use. All right, so it looks like we don't have any more questions. So in that case, I'm going to move on to the next part of our like web app we're trying to build. So now that we've kind of like shown you how you can use the explain function as well as the fix function, I want to show you how you can like use GitHub Copilot to add things into a program if you're like not sure how you would do that. So here I think like a pretty natural one I could do would be asking the Copilot to add a route that displays the hours since the epoch. So we already have seconds. I feel like hours isn't like that much more difficult, but I maybe don't want to write out all of the code and figure that all out. Maybe I want a little bit of an idea from GitHub Copilot. All right, so it's given me a suggestion pretty quickly. So it's created a new route at the hours /hours, and then within that, it's going to be calling the function hours very appropriately, and then it's going to be calling the epoch as well as assigning the epoch to it's assigning like an integer of the epoch to hours, but it will be dividing it by 3600, which makes sense because there's 3600 seconds in each hour. And then it's going to be returning a string of hours, so it will return properly. I think this looks right. One other possible thing that we could be doing is just calling the epoch, the second since epoch function, rather than this. But I think this is a pretty good solution from GitHub Copilot. I'm going to accept it. And then here, I'm going to navigate to the hours route. All right, the URL is not found. I think it's because I just need to rerun the Flask app. Sometimes it takes a little while for it to update in the terminal. So I will do Flask run one more time. As we can see here, it's reloaded to the main screen. I'm going to go to hours once more. And as we can see here, it has the hours since epoch. And then I'll navigate back to the main directory, and we can see it's much longer, kind of showing us how long like the number of seconds is versus the number of hours. So I think it's cool that it was able to generate that a lot faster than I probably would have been able to. So now that we've done that, I think a natural kind of like first step would be to go into, or not first, but a natural next step would be minutes. Just so we kind of have all three like basic times. So I'm going to open up GitHub Copilot. I open it up by doing Command I. If you're on a PC, I believe it's Control I. If anyone's on PC can verify that for me, that'd be great. And I'm going to say add a route for the number of minutes since epoch. All right, so this one is interesting because it added an extra function as well. So it isn't just kind of repeating what it generated last time. So it here at the root of minutes is returning minutes since epoch in the minutes function. And up here it has another function, minutes since epoch, where it's finding the epoch, it's finding the number of minutes, and it's returning the string in minutes. I'm going to accept this. I think that we could probably have it be a little bit shorter. I don't necessarily see the point of having an outside function for this particular route, but I think it will work nonetheless. I'm going to accept it. Then we can maybe make things a little bit more efficient. This little bit, I'm going to end the current Flask app that's running and rerun it so that we have all of our new changes up to date. It's going to initially go to the seconds, as you can see, 17, I think I want to say million, maybe 170 million. I'm not sure. And then we're going to go to minutes and see how this number changes. As you can see, it's gone down a significant amount because it's dividing it by 60 because there are 60 minutes in each hour. Awesome. So that's kind of like some basic functionality for the epoch. Do we have any questions? It looks like we do. All right. When I hit Control I, it asks GitHub, GitUp, or Copilot. I'm going to assume GitUp means GitHub. If you want to use Copilot, I would just hit Copilot if it's asking you between the two. What is the shortcut key for chat with GitHub Copilot? That's a good question. Let me Google that. I'm not sure. Because I just Googled and said Control I for the inline chat, which is like the buttons you're seeing kind of appear in my IDE. I'm curious if I do Control I and then explain. Okay, it looks like in at least code spaces, it will automatically go to like the column version. And imagine if you did the docs function or something else, but if you're doing, I guess, code suggestion, it's going to just kind of put it in lines. You're able to read it a little bit faster and like easier to like edit things if you don't want to do exactly what it suggested. All right. For the server, we're just using a basic Flask app and running that. You may need to run this command if you're having any issues with Flask. You might need to run this pip command to install all of the requirements, which that'll just install all the requirements that are in this Flask app. You may also need to click on, you might have to run it this way if you want to look at the debugging commands on like locally. You might want to do flask python -m flask run debug, but if you have Flask installed in VS Code, the Flask run, because it's named app, should work just fine. All right. Where did app.py come from? That just came from like the default MLH starter repo. If you just finish signing up for Copilot through the student developer pack, you will need to wait in order to be verified to use it. If you already have the developer pack, then you should be able to install it once you've logged into GitHub, like your GitHub account in VS Code. All right, so now that I've kind of walked y'all through the overall, like how you would use GitHub Copilot and added a few things into this particular Flask app, and like added in some other routes. I'm going to show you a few other GitHub Copilot commands before we talk a little bit more about other resources. So if you click on I and you do slash, there's a few different like commands you can use. I'm going to go to doc and see what it comes up with. I'm going to X out the simple browser because it's created quite a lot and it is awesome. So this is a documentation command. It's returning documentation for the entirety of this application. I'm not going to add all that in just because I don't think it needs that much documentation. But if you're working with a larger application, you don't want to document everything. I think this is a great way to kind of have like some starter stuff. Again, you want to make sure that it's accurately documenting everything, and you might need to add additional notes in for your teammates or anyone else who might be using your code later. If you want to do test, this is going to generate some unit tests for the selected code. Okay, so you can see it's in the test_app.python file, and those are some unit tests to make sure that it's correctly generating seconds, minutes, and hours. I don't think that these unit tests need to be like that complex, as you can see, because there's only really one right answer because the epoch is a set time. But I think it's a really useful tool if you have a more complex web app or Flask application that you need to run unit tests for. Yeah. So that's kind of the basics of this Flask application. Now I'm going to move back over to my slides, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about some resources you can use GitHub Copilot with. After the fact, I use it pretty frequently when I'm coding, when I'm trying to make documentation, or running into an error that I need help fixing. And I think it's a great tool for students to use. So I'm going to change my screen back to this, and I'm going to go through all of these that I showed you kind of in the project. All right, so some next steps now that we've walked through a basic use case for GitHub Copilot is like when you're using GitHub Copilot, I forgot to share my slides. Here they are. GitHub Copilot makes errors. You want to make sure that when you're using Copilot, you're doing so mindfully. It's built on OpenAI's GPT-4 model. It's very, like it works very well most of the time, but on occasion it will write bad code and it won't understand what you want to do every single time. So you want to make sure that you are kind of reading through and vetting everything before you deploy it to anything, before you're submitting it as a school project. I definitely highly recommend that you're using Copilot as an assistant rather than doing the heavy lifting. Like I mentioned earlier, it could be easy to run into plagiarism if you're not careful and you don't have that setting unchecked if you're a student. And also, it only has code samples up to September of 2021. So it's not going to know everything about very new applications, libraries, APIs. So just make sure that you are making sure you're reading and understanding everything that Copilot is giving to you, whether it be the explanation, the code samples, just to make sure that you're using it as an assistant and you're not making any errors due to using Copilot. Also, if you want to add it into a hackathon project, I think it's a great idea to use Copilot for your team. Get all the hackers on your team to utilize it for when you're making a hackathon project. I think it'll supercharge things like when you're working on a project throughout the weekend. And the nice thing about having Copilot as a teammate is it won't ask for any of your hackathon prizes. You'll get to use that for yourselves. So I think it's a great tool to utilize. If you're interested in using Copilot after this workshop, here are some additional resources. The first one has a bunch of guides to configure Copilot through a bunch of different environments. So if your preferred IDE is not VS Code, you can use this guide to figure out how to use it in a different IDE. And if you're curious about how to configure it to your personal preferences, you can go to Copilot configuration. And if you want to look at some practical examples of Copilot in action, you can always use Copilot examples, and that'll show you a few examples of that. Awesome. Okay. So that's all I have for y'all today. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about GitHub Copilot and are able to use it kind of going forward in your different hackathon projects, maybe when you're stuck on a bug. I think it's a great tool to use. And now I'm going to answer any questions you have in the chat. If you don't have the repo, how do you get it? Someone else responded with the GitHub repository. So you'll just go to this URL. If you want to clone it in the command line will just be git space clone space this URL. And it should be cloning into whatever repository you're in. But I would recommend using kind of like the user interface. In VS Code, it's a lot more intuitive and you're able to configure things a little bit easier if you're unfamiliar with command line prompts. Could you do this in Colab? Colab is owned by Google and is not an IDE like VS Code, like other things with JetBrains. I'm forgetting other IDE names, but you are able to use it with Jupyter notebooks in VS Code. So if you make a Jupyter notebook file similar to like what you would be doing in Google Colab, you're able to use it with that. I'll be walking through a tutorial in Jupyter notebooks in GitHub code spaces later, like with I'll have like this installed so I can show you how to do that at the next workshop in just a few minutes. But your short answer no, but you can use it with Jupyter notebooks in an IDE. There will be a recorded video of this live session. It will take a little while for it to get uploaded to our Twitch and our YouTube, but it will be there shortly. So just keep an eye out for that. Awesome. Looks like we don't have any more questions. Thank y'all for tuning in. I had a blast walking you through one of my favorite technical tools. Make sure to come back in about 10 minutes. I'll be doing another Global Hack Week stream. This one will be on how to make a Mad Libs generator with natural language processing. I'm super excited to walk y'all through that, and I'd love to have more of you hackers at that in just a few. Thank y'all for coming. See you in a few.